I should have known from the moment I caught her lingering by the sewing table that something was off. The air in the atelier was thick with the scent of jasmine and starch, the perfect cover for deceit. My wedding dress lay spread across the floor like a delicate white canvas, its lace shimmering under the soft afternoon light filtering through the window. I had spent months designing it, choosing every stitch, every bead, every layer of silk, and yet, there she was, my sister, Mara, smiling with that infuriating combination of innocence and malice that I had come to dread. "You really think it needs more pearls?" she asked sweetly, fingering the hem as if she were merely curious. Her voice dripped with an artificial concern that set my nerves on fire. I should have known better. Mara had always had a talent for pretense, a way of masking her envy behind honeyed words and a perfectly tilted head. But this time, I knew it was more than jealousy simmering beneath the surface. It was sabotage. "I think it's perfect," I replied, my voice clipped though I tried to sound calm. "I've worked so hard on it. I don't want anyone changing it at this stage." I watched her closely as she nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, the kind that made my skin crawl. She had always wanted to outshine me. Always. Our parents had told me I was the golden child, the achiever, the one who followed rules and earned praise. Mara, meanwhile, was the shadow, the one who sulked quietly when I got accolades, only to smile at me later as if nothing had happened. But this time, she wouldn't just sulk. She wanted victory, and it came at my expense. I didn't realize it then, but the fraying threads she had tucked into the seams, the subtle loosening of the boning inside the bodice, it wasn't random. Mara had spent weeks planning her quiet rebellion and I had walked right into it, blind to the signs. Later that evening, as I was inspecting the dress under the warm glow of the dressing room lights, I felt the first twinge of panic. A stitch here, a lining there. It looked fine, but there was a subtle slackness that shouldn't have been there. My fingers trembled as I tugged gently, and the fabric sagged just enough to send my heart racing. I thought of confronting her immediately, of lashing out with the fury that had been simmering since childhood. But deep down, I knew that would play right into her hands. Mara thrived on chaos, on seeing me unravel, and I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Not yet. I spent the night sleepless, examining every inch of the dress, mentally retracing every step of its creation. The betrayal stung far more than I expected. This was supposed to be my day, my celebration of love and commitment, yet here was my own sister, undermining me in the most intimate way possible. How could someone so close wish me humiliation and with such precision? My thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Tears would have been her victory. The morning of the wedding arrived with a deceptive calm. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the rose petals scattered along the aisle, the ribbons tied perfectly to the pews, the guests buzzing with excitement. I stood in the bridal suite staring at the mirror, willing myself to appear serene. My heart thumped painfully against my chest, every beat echoing the betrayal I carried like a weight. I could see Mara hovering at the door, her expression the perfect mask of concern, her hands pressed together in that way she always did when she wanted sympathy to hide guilt. "Are you nervous?" she asked, the words soft, almost fragile. I forced a smile. "Just excited. Nervous doesn't suit me." Her lips twitched, a barely noticeable smirk, and I caught it. That was all it took. I realized then that the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Mara thought she had orchestrated my downfall, but she underestimated me. My patience, my cunning, and my refusal to crumble. I didn't want a petty confrontation in front of the entire congregation. I wanted something far more devastating, far more satisfying. As I stepped into the dress, carefully adjusting the layers, I felt the familiar surge of control that always came when I meticulously solved a problem. I wouldn't let her win by forcing me to unravel before everyone. Instead, I would outshine her in a way she could never anticipate. Every subtle flaw she had introduced could be countered, enhanced even, to make the gown, and me, more radiant. My fingers traced the areas she had tampered with, and a plan began to form, intricate and precise, like the stitches in the bodice I now held in my hands. When the music began, signaling the start of the ceremony, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. Mara took her place beside me, the perfect sister, poised and elegant while I descended the aisle with all eyes on me. I could feel her envy simmering, hidden behind practiced smiles as the guests' admiration washed over me. Every whispered compliment, every gasp of awe, every tear in someone's eye was a quiet victory over her subtle cruelty. I moved with grace, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. By the time I reached the altar, I realized that my revenge didn't need shouting, confrontation, or drama. It was in the brilliance of my composure, the elegance of my gown, the undeniable presence I carried. Mara's sabotage had become irrelevant. The dress didn't betray me, because I had outwitted her. And as our hands met, her eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and fury, emotions she tried to mask, but couldn't completely hide. I had turned her trap into a stage for my triumph. Yet, even as the vows were exchanged, I knew the real work was only beginning. Mara would not forget this. She would watch, seethe, and plan, just as I had learned to do in the quiet hours of betrayal. But I had tasted the sweet clarity of victory that day, and it fueled something deeper inside me. A cunning, deliberate drive to reclaim every ounce of dignity and respect she had tried to steal. The ceremony ended with applause, smiles, and tears, but inside, I carried a different kind of satisfaction. Mara had underestimated me, and in doing so, she had created a stage for my subtle, perfect revenge. My dress gleamed, my presence shone, and I knew that the memory of this day would haunt her in ways she could never articulate. The tension between us had shifted, the power dynamic altered, and I felt an intoxicating sense of control that no betrayal could undo. As the guests mingled and photographs were taken, I caught Mara's eye across the room. Her lips pressed into a tight line, her hands clenched slightly, her envy almost palpable. I smiled softly, deliberately, a quiet acknowledgement that I had won without a word, without confrontation. My victory was in the elegance, the brilliance, and the undeniable truth that I had not only survived her treachery, but transformed it into something extraordinary. And that night, as I lay in the dress I had fought so hard to protect, I realized that revenge didn't need to be loud to be satisfying. Sometimes it was in the subtle triumphs, in the moments when your adversary thought they had you cornered, only to discover that you had turned their schemes into your spotlight. Mara had tried to tarnish me, but I had outshined her in every conceivable way, and the taste of that victory was sweeter than any confrontation could have been. The war between sisters had shifted, undeniably, and I was ready for the next move, because while I had won this battle, I knew Mara would be watching, waiting, scheming, and I would be ready, always one step ahead, every thread, every pearl, every step of the way. The days after the wedding were deceptively calm. Everyone assumed that the tension between Mara and me had dissipated under the veil of smiles and celebration. They didn't see what simmered beneath the surface, the quiet war that had only just begun. I returned to the house my husband and I had bought, a bright space filled with promise and sunlight, but even its warmth could not melt the frost that Mara had embedded in my life. She lingered, uninvited, slipping in under the pretense of sisterly concern. Each visit, each casual question, each helpful suggestion felt like a calculated move in a game I hadn't agreed to play, but I would play, and I would win. It started with little things. The way she critiqued my cooking, underhanded comments about my new life, subtle digs about my in-laws. Nothing overt, nothing that anyone else could see, but each remark was a test, a way to see if I would falter, and I did falter, just enough to feel the sting, to recognize her presence as a threat. But I also observed, recorded, and planned. Mara had always believed that her charm and timing were impenetrable, that I would never see through her layers. She was wrong. I began to watch her, study her interactions, her patterns, her weaknesses. Every smile she offered, every compliment she feigned, was a potential crack in her armor. It wasn't just my life she wanted to manipulate. It was everything around me. My husband, sweet and unsuspecting, adored her at first, unable to see the subtle venom she injected into conversation. "She's just teasing," he'd say when I tried to voice concern. But I knew better. I could see the calculations behind her eyes, the way she lingered too long at the dinner table, the way she asked too many questions about our finances, our plans, our vulnerabilities. Mara's envy wasn't passive. It was deliberate, precise, and relentless. I decided then that direct confrontation was useless. Mara thrived on conflict. She would twist it, spin it, turn sympathy to her favor. No, I needed a strategy, one that would expose her without ever touching her directly. I would turn her own manipulations against her, subtly, cleverly, like threads weaving a tapestry she could never unravel. It required patience, timing, and a meticulous attention to every detail. But I had all of those. The first step was to reinforce my own position. I strengthened bonds with everyone Mara had tried to sway, friends, family, even our colleagues. I listened when she tried to speak over me, gently but firmly asserting my perspective. I complimented others in ways that highlighted my awareness and generosity, making sure her attempts at sabotage felt petty and transparent. Each small victory, each subtle correction was a step toward reclaiming the ground she had tried to take from me. Then came the subtle art of psychological chess. Mara was confident, too confident, and she underestimated my capacity for foresight. I let her plant seeds of doubt where she could, only to water them with my own quiet countermeasures. When she whispered to our cousin about my supposed incompetence in handling the wedding gifts, I ensured that I had already arranged for a discreet record of how efficiently I had organized everything. When she hinted to my mother that I had been careless with finances, I made sure our accounts were transparent, flawless, and undeniable. Every move she made could be subtly redirected, and I began to relish the growing tension in her eyes, the slight tremor in her otherwise composed posture when she realized her words no longer had power over me. The turning point came on a day that seemed ordinary at first. Mara had arranged a brunch with the women in our family, ostensibly to catch up and discuss my new life. I arrived, composed and radiant, dressed not in bridal white but in a subtle, confident elegance that commanded attention without screaming for it. Mara's smile faltered the moment she saw me. I felt a thrill, not of malice but of triumph, because I knew that the careful web I had spun was beginning to tighten around her. She tried her usual tactics, asking loaded questions, making comparisons, attempting to draw the group into her narrative. But I had anticipated everything. I responded with grace, humor, and precision, redirecting every comment back to a neutral or positive frame. I praised others in ways that highlighted her subtle insecurities, and for the first time, I saw her falter. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face when a cousin noted how smoothly the house had been managed, how thoughtful the gifts were, how radiant I had been during the wedding. Mara's usual charm couldn't mask her frustration. By the end of the brunch, I had achieved something more than victory. I had established control. Mara's envy was still present, simmering, but it no longer held dominion over the room. The power dynamic had shifted. I could feel it in her tense posture, in the careful way she measured her words, in the tiny flicker of hesitation before she spoke. It was intoxicating to see her, once so confident, forced to recognize my subtle ascendancy. But I wasn't done. Mara's true nature meant she would regroup, escalate, and find new ways to undermine me. I had to anticipate her next move before she even conceived it. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind a whirlwind of strategy and foresight. I thought about every past betrayal, every sibling rivalry, every instance where she had tried to manipulate, outshine, or demean me. I didn't feel hatred. I felt clarity. I understood her completely, and in understanding her, I realized that the most satisfying revenge would not be overt confrontation but a quiet, undeniable display of superiority that left no room for argument. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mara had begun spreading rumors, subtle accusations about my professional life, my social standing, and even my marriage. Nothing concrete, nothing visible to outsiders, but enough to create tension and doubt if left unchecked. I chose to respond, not with anger, but with precision. I invited her to a family gathering under the guise of reconciliation, ensuring that key witnesses would be present. I allowed her to speak freely, to attempt her manipulations, all while I gathered evidence, careful recordings, casual conversations, visible proof of my competence and grace in every area she sought to tarnish. When the moment arrived, I let her speak. She smiled confident, certain that her words would land like knives. But the knife turned in her own hand. I responded with facts, subtly yet undeniably, exposing every exaggeration, every misrepresentation. I did not raise my voice, I did not accuse. I simply presented reality so clearly, so elegantly, that the room itself seemed to weigh against her. I saw the color drain from her cheeks, the brief flare of panic in her eyes, the way she faltered mid-sentence. And in that instant, I knew she realized she had lost not just the argument, but the invisible throne she had claimed over our lives. The aftermath was delicate but complete. Mara withdrew, confused and frustrated, unable to pinpoint exactly how her influence had eroded. She tried small acts of sabotage afterward, but they were increasingly transparent, ineffective, and I, calm and patient, continued to thrive. My victories subtle but unmistakable. I didn't need confrontation to prove my strength. I let my life, my competence, and my grace do it for me. Every smile I gave, every word I spoke, every success I achieved became a reminder of her failed schemes. Even now, I knew the war was not fully over. Mara was patient, and she would wait for new opportunities to strike. But I had tasted the satisfaction of outmaneuvering her, of turning her envy into my advantage, and I understood the depth of my own resilience. I had transformed betrayal into clarity, envy into motivation, and sabotage into triumph. And as I looked into the mirror, reflecting on the subtle victories of the past weeks, I realized that this was only the beginning of the story I would write, one in which I was never the victim again, only the strategist, the orchestrator, and ultimately, the victor. The final act of my plan began with Mara's own overconfidence. She had grown careless, emboldened by her belief that she had learned my limits. She assumed that after the subtle humiliations, the careful dismantling of her schemes, I would shrink, falter, or attempt direct confrontation. But she underestimated patience, foresight, and the quiet cunning that I had honed in every sleepless night since the dress incident. It started with the charity gala, an annual event that Mara had long dominated with her charm and her carefully curated image of sophistication. She had positioned herself as the hostess, the center of attention, believing that I would stand in the shadows, the dutiful sister, the silent rival. Instead, I arrived in a manner that was both understated and impossible to ignore. My dress, elegant and precise, shimmered with a subtle brilliance, not gaudy, not flashy, but commanding. It was a statement. Presence without desperation. Mara's eyes widened the moment she saw me. The room seemed to pivot slightly as if the energy itself acknowledged my arrival. Mara tried her usual tactics, charm, insinuation, whispering subtle critiques under the guise of friendly advice, but I had anticipated every word. I floated through the event, graceful, engaging, and impossibly composed. I complimented, I listened, I responded with a precision that left her manipulations bouncing harmlessly off my calm. And every time she attempted to draw attention to herself at my expense, I redirected the focus effortlessly, creating situations where her words exposed her vanity rather than diminishing me. The pivotal moment came during the auction portion of the gala. Mara had planned to secure a high-profile donation, one she had cultivated for months, to showcase her influence and generosity. She wanted public acknowledgement, a small victory that would signal her superiority. I had quietly secured the same donation, but on my own terms, discreetly ensuring the organization would publicly credit my efforts without exposing Mara's maneuver. When the time came to announce it, the applause and gratitude swept toward me. Mara's confident posture faltered, the carefully maintained mask cracking for a fraction of a second that felt like eternity. It was the first real, undeniable crack in her armor, and I could see it. She flitted from group to group, trying to regain control, but the energy had shifted. Every glance from a guest, every word of acknowledgement, subtly reinforced her failure and my triumph. The satisfaction wasn't in humiliation, not in shouting or confrontation. It was in the undeniable proof that I had outmaneuvered her with elegance, subtlety, and intelligence. After the gala, as the guests departed and Mara lingered, her composure finally breaking, she cornered me privately. I could see the fury behind her eyes, the shame she tried to mask with sarcasm. "You think you've won?" she spat, voice low and dangerous. I smiled, soft, unshaken, the calm that had become my armor. "I don't need to think. It's obvious." Her breath hitched, and I knew then that the lesson had sunk in. She had learned, perhaps too late, that her manipulations could not touch me, that envy and deceit paled in the face of patience, strategy, and self-possession. She had underestimated the power of subtlety, the quiet impact of being unshakable, of letting actions speak louder than words. In the following weeks, the pattern cemented itself. Mara's influence waned while mine subtly expanded. The dress incident, the sabotage, the whisper campaigns, all of it became part of a story that I could narrate without malice, merely stating facts as needed. Friends, family, colleagues, all began to see Mara's tendencies for what they were. Envy disguised as charm, manipulation disguised as care. And I was no longer merely the sister who outshined her on one day. I was the one who commanded respect, quietly but undeniably, in every facet of my life. Even Mara herself began to retreat. I noticed her cautious behavior, her hesitation before speaking, her careful calculation of every move. She tried, subtly, to regain some semblance of authority, but each effort bounced harmlessly off the armor of patience and foresight I had built. The taste of her failure lingered in the air, almost palpable, and I savored it, not in cruelty, but in justice. One evening, as the golden sun dipped behind the horizon and the house was bathed in amber light, I found Mara in the living room, her posture stiff, her expression an uneasy mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. She spoke first, unusually quiet. "You've changed," she said, almost a whisper. I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "Not changed, just learned. Some of us have to learn the hard way." She looked away, biting her lip, and I could see her understanding. The unspoken acknowledgement that her games, her subtle attempts to undermine me, had failed. And in that moment, I felt something rare, a sense of closure. Revenge had not been about cruelty. It had been about reclaiming dignity, asserting control, and demonstrating that manipulation could not prevail against clarity and composure. The years that followed were smooth, though Mara never fully forgave me. She remained part of my life, our interactions tinged with tension, but the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I had learned the power of subtle, non-violent revenge, the potency of patience and strategic grace. Every event, every gathering, every family moment became a stage where her envy could no longer overshadow my presence. I moved through life with the quiet authority that made her schemes futile. And though our relationship was forever altered, I no longer carried resentment the way I once had. Mara had taught me a lesson in vigilance, strategy, and the art of quiet triumph. I had transformed betrayal into empowerment, envy into insight, and sabotage into an opportunity to rise even higher. Every glance she cast my way, every whispered remark she attempted, reminded me of the careful orchestration that had led me to this place, a place of undeniable, elegant victory. At night, alone in the same bedroom where I had once fretted over the sabotage dress, I would occasionally smile, remembering the intricate ballet of patience, foresight, and strategy that had allowed me to emerge unscathed, radiant, and victorious. Mara's attempts at undermining me had become the threads of my ultimate triumph. I didn't just survive her envy, I flourished because of it. And in that quiet, private triumph, I understood the true meaning of revenge. It was not destruction, not cruelty, not confrontation. It was power wielded with precision, grace, and unwavering composure. Mara had tried to shatter me, but I had turned her own schemes into my stage. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had outshined her in every possible way, and nothing she could do would ever take that from me.